This tutorial, what we're going to do, we're just going to discuss a few things that relate to synthesis. Okay, so by the way, this tutorial applies to Logic. Okay, and in this case, we're going to use an instrument which is called the ES2 synthesizer. However, synthesis as a definition, it's the same for any virtual instrument. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to simply create a software instrument track, and I am going to insert this ES2 synthesizer, and then click on Create. Okay, well let's have a bit of a look at this thing. So the ES2 essentially it's kind of designed to behave the same way and more as a standard analog synthesizer. So you see that you've got a whole range of different knobs and sliders and all sorts of different things, right? But I can pretty much guarantee that by the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to at least have a relatively good understanding of what everything does. So, and we're going to break down the actual instruments into different sections. So, like I said, this instrument is primarily designed to emulate what an analog synthesizer does, okay? And this type of synthesis is called subtractive synthesis, and we'll discuss that in a second. So the first thing that we need to know, though, we need to have a bit of a look at this panel, okay? So you can see that you've got 1, 2, and 3 different sort of buttons that allow you to actually choose a range of different waveforms. Okay, so those buttons or those knobs right there, they're called oscillators. Okay, so oscillators make a sound. Okay, let's have a bit of a listen, see what they sound like. Pretty boring sound. Okay, so but hopefully by the end of this tutorial we would have managed to come up with something that is a bit more convincing than that. Okay. You can actually turn the oscillators off, which means that if I'm pressing a key at the moment and no sound, okay? So for the minute, we're actually going to use 1. All right? You can see that you've got a range of different symbols, so which means that you can actually select different waveforms. So if you start from the top, you'll see that the first waveform is what is called a sine wave. Which sounds a bit like a test tone. All right. You've got a pulse width wave right there. We're not going to discuss that in a minute just yet. You've got a square wave right here. And you can see that it actually sounds quite different from the sine wave. All right. So they do have different sound qualities. The next one that we're going to look at, this is what is called a sawtooth wave. And the last one that we're going to look at is, in fact, what is called a triangular waveform. Okay, so all those different waveforms, they have different sound qualities. Okay, let's keep it at this sawtooth wave. Now, the next knob that we're going to look at is this one here. Okay, what that does allows you to increase or decrease the tuning of such oscillator. Okay, so I can actually increase the tuning of the oscillator by a full octave, 2 octaves if I wish, and I can detune it as well by an octave if I want to, or anything in between. Imagine that I want to tune my oscillator up by 7 semitones, which is in fact a perfect fifth. That's what it sounds like. All right. So you can also tune and detune an oscillator in between semitones. Okay. So I can actually turn this up or down. Okay. Which means that what that does allows me to fine tune an oscillator in between semitones. So if this is a C, I can actually tune it up a bit more. And you can see that there's a slight increase in pitch, and so on. Okay, so and that will become evident in a minute. All right, well, let's bring in the second oscillator, perhaps, see what it sounds like. Definitely sounds a little bit richer, okay? And let's bring the third one. All right, so what we're going to do now, we're actually just going to try to manipulate these oscillators using the same waveform, but this oscillator right here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to detune it a semitone, I'm going to detune it an octave, okay, so which is in fact minus 12 semitones. All right, so that starts sounding a bit more interesting. Now this one here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to tune it up 7 semitones, okay, which is in fact a perfect fifth. All right, that's pretty cool. Now another thing that you could possibly do, just to kind of give the whole sound a bit more character, you can also slightly detune the oscillators just to create something which is a bit of a, it's almost like a chorus kind of effect. All right, let's do that. So I'm going to tune this up a little bit. I'm going to detune this a little bit, and you can be quite random if you want to. So this one here is going to be like that. Let's have a listen. All right, okay, that started sounding a bit more interesting. Other things that you could do, by the way, see that you've got this triangle in the middle. Well, what that does, that almost acts like a little mixer. So if you want more of oscillator 1, you would move that up here. And if you only want to listen to oscillator 2, you just move it that way, or anything in between. So you can actually choose, you can sort of create a blend of oscillators, okay? So I'm going to put that back in the middle. All right, so we understood that this is in fact the oscillator section, which means that oscillators make sounds. Okay, now the next step is this. The oscillators then travel into what is called the filter section. Okay, now you've got a whole range of different filters right here. For the moment, for the purpose of this tutorial, we're only going to look at those 3 filters. So we're going to have a look at the cutoff filter, resonant filter, and the drive. Okay, the drive, it's almost like a distortion. Now, a filter, it's almost like a, it's in fact like an equalizer, okay? So at the moment, it's actually set to low pass filter. So a low pass filter, which means that all the low end, all the low frequencies will pass through, but it will cut the high end frequencies. Let's have a listen. So if I play a key, now the filter is fully open. Now if I close it, you can actually hear that only the low end of the spectrum is going through the filter. Okay. Now I can also use what is called a high pass filter, and a high pass filter does in fact the opposite, which means that only the high end frequencies will pass through, but not the low end. Okay. Now at the moment, the filter is fully open, so no low end is coming through, and so on. Okay, and that's it. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're not going to have a look at the peak filter, band reject, and band pass. So we're only going to have a look at the the low pass and the high pass filter. Now what happens is that we've also got this resonant filter, which this is actually really interesting. Okay, so what a resonant filter does essentially increases the frequencies right where that cutoff frequency filter becomes active. Okay, so which means that if I've got no low pass filter, no resonant filter, if I turn it up, you can hear that it actually starts peaking. You've got to be very careful with the resonant filter because it can sort of scream quite a bit. So but you can come up with some really interesting effects. All right, so let's go back where we were. So this is our sound again. All right, now, so we've got the oscillator section, goes into the filter section. Now the next stage is what is in fact called the output. Okay, the output is where you've got your volume. Okay, so you can turn it all the way down, no sound, turn it all the way up. Um, you also have like a whole range of effects. So for example, you can actually add some distortion to your sound, soft distortion or hard distortion. You can also add a sine wave to it to basically just reinforce what you've already got there. So, all right. And you also have like a range of effects. You've got a chorus effect, you've got a flanger, and you've got a phaser. See what it sounds like with a bit of phaser. Pretty cool. All right. So this is what we've got. Another pretty cool trick that you can use, you can also use this unison button, which is right there. Now what the unison does, if I turn the unison on, you'll see that it says that 4 voices, okay? What it does, it means that it plays 4 of the same sounds simultaneously, which means that one sound is going to be stacked up 4 times, which makes it sound like this. You can definitely hear that it's a lot bigger and wider, right? So you can actually do that. What I suggest you to do as well, maybe just have a listen to what it sounds like, perhaps like an octave down. Or an octave higher. Alright, cool. Another cool thing that you could possibly do, you can also add some of this analog right here. So if we turn it up, you know, you can actually just apparently it actually gives the sound a bit of an analog type of quality, you know, which is, you know, perhaps like a bit of detuned. Alright, so that's it. Cool. The next bit. You can see that you've got number 1, 2, and 3 envelopes. Okay? So envelopes are really important when it comes down to any sound. Okay? So an envelope, essentially what it does, allows you to figure out the shape of a sound over time. Okay? So for example, you can see that at the moment you've got what is called attack, decay, sustain, and release. Okay, which means that if I turn everything down, I'm not going to be able to hear anything. Okay, I can probably hear maybe just a click, and that's it. That's it. That's my sound. Why is that? Well, simply because of the fact that the sound doesn't have any attack, which means that it's really, really short. It doesn't have any release, okay, which means that it ends really, really quickly. And it doesn't have any sustain, which means that, you know, the sound doesn't actually reach a specific level where it's audible, okay? So what you can do in that case, you can actually sort of, by adding some sustain to the sound, for example, let's have a listen, maybe a little bit more. I just want that time there. Okay, so by playing around, you can actually... Alright, so let's give it full sustain. Alright. So you can actually see that the sound, you can actually hear that the sound actually starts immediately, but also ends immediately. Alright. Imagine that we want to create like a pad type of sound for the purpose of creating some kind of cinematic type of soundscape. Alright. Well, what I can do, I can actually increase the attack quite a bit. But also what I'm going to do, I'm also going to increase the release quite a bit as well, which means that the sound is going to start a bit later, but it will finish later as well, like this. Alright, well that's pretty cool, okay? And this is literally straight off the bat. We haven't actually done a great deal of of programming. You know, we've literally just played around with the filters, maybe just played around with some of those effects here, and we actually just played around with this envelope. See what it sounds like if I maybe. Okay, a bit much maybe, but you get the idea. All right, so and that's it. All right. So other things that you could do to your sound, perhaps, that now that you've assuming that that's the sound that you want, you can sort of start adding some effects simply by go to your plugins and see what we've got. Maybe some Space Designer, perhaps. That's actually just a very good. I'm just gonna, just grab a. I kind of like those warp spaces actually. So let's have a look, see what it sounds like. Shadows. And that's that. There are also there's a range of really cool plugins that you could possibly use. I tend to just really like this one here. Where is it? This multi effects, this step effects. That's great. So see what it sounds. You can sort of come up with some really interesting sort of rhythmical and arpeggiated type of sounds, such as, for example, let's have a look. Goodness, Chaos Gate. And so on. Let's have a look at this some different. And so on. You can just simply, you can just go crazy and nuts and, just finding stuff out. And I think that's the end of my tutorial. And I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you've got any queries, just feel free to let me know. Take care.